Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. Welcome everybody to this Tuesday edition of the program. It's a real pleasure to have you with us this evening. Now tonight we're shaking things up just a bit. Well, this week we're shaking things up really. Because tonight's show is going to be an unlocked episode of our after show, The Beyond. Well, frankly, my team and I are beat. It's been a long year and a long, spooky season. So we're taking this Tuesday off. But you all know how I work. I don't like to leave you empty-handed. So I've dug deep into our countless hours of content in the Beyond and put together a hybrid episode for you. Now, if you do not or have not supported us on Patreon or paid Apple subscriptions, this will be brand new content to you. And if you have, we appreciate it. Now what I've done is taken two Beyond episodes, Season 17, Episode 17, and Season 17, Episode 19, and sandwiched them together for your entertainment. Now I'll be back on Thursday with a brand new episode. But for now, please enjoy Season 17, Episode 7, already in progress. It's over in the Beyond that I share calls like Sam's out of the state of Kansas.
Hi, I'm Sam, and I'm from Kansas, southeast Kansas, actually. You know, I have a grandma, and she's in her 90s now, and she's just been more open in the last, I'd say, 10 years about just her views on life and death, and, you know, just a lot of things have come up that haven't ever came up before, but makes a lot of sense looking back on my life. So there's a ton of stories, really, to be quite honest, but the most incredibly scary story that has ever happened in the house that I can imagine happened when shortly after we switched around my grandma's room. I was probably 12, so this has been about, you know, a long time ago. And Grandma was laying in bed, and she saw a figure of a man walk into her room, which there is a open bathroom. Her house was made in the 1920s, and there was like an open bathroom with no door, claw bathtub, real old school. And she saw the man walk out, and she's like, man, I must be dreaming. So she disregarded it. She just literally just went to sleep. The next time she is laying down, she is about to sleep, and she smells like a cigar, and it caused her to be like, oh, is there something on fire? Like, what the heck is that? And my grandpa smoked cigars from time to time, not a heavy smoker by any means. And she sees this gentleman walking through that same doorway in a fedora and smells a cigar. And, you know, at this point she's like, I'm crazy, but I'm gonna say it. And she asked, you know, are you Sam, which was her husband? And she said as plain as day, they said no, and just continued to stand there. And she was so terrified, but she said, oh, you know, I am literally not able to get out of bed and move. You know, she's using an assisted device, and there's just no way for this to happen. So she said the best thing she could potentially do at that point is to say, okay. And she covered her head up and eventually passed out. And that is something that has forever stayed with her. And this gentleman has returned multiple times since then. And Grandma does not say anything to him and just ignores it and goes on. She doesn't believe that he's obviously a person. She does think it's a spirit of somebody, but truly terrifying. And it just is crazy to think that, all of the things that happened to me and my cousins, my brother, when we were younger, kind of all solidified when my grandma told me that. And she's like, you're probably going to think I'm crazy. I promise. I'm not, delirious. I don't have dementia. And I was like, Grandma, you just opened up a whole nother can of worms, because this makes so much sense as to some of the awful feelings that me and my family have had in the home. Our whole life, me being in my 30s now, like, we're talking about 30 years of evidence of all kinds of stuff that I just thought I was crazy. So I actually did perform a BIM score on her, and that is a cognitive test that nurses do a lot of times in skilled nursing facilities, and we now do it in home health, where you do test their cognitive abilities, and my grandma did pass that test. So I completely believe everything she said. And the other thing is, I do think that there was an incident that my brother, which he would never probably tell anybody about this, but he would call me after this happened. He took my grandma out to get her, a sandwich and drive around, because my grandma was very homebound, unless she has some help. And he came home, and it was a summer night. It was a clear night. Nothing was going on. And my brother, helped my grandma to the house, which is a task, and, he gets her into the house, and he goes back out, gets, her purse and stuff, and goes back in, and my grandma's like, I wonder how this happened. Well, she's talking about a very large painting that she's had for a long time, like super long time. It weighs a ton. It really does. It has a very bulky, heavy frame, and she's had it forever. So it's in her dining room in the corner, and there's actually, covering a portion of it, is a very large china cabinet. So my grandma found this painting in the middle of her dining room, I would say about 12 feet away from the wall. And a portion of this painting is indeed covered by this huge china cabinet. There's also a dining room table and chairs that this would have to go over to be in the middle of the room. So when my brother saw that, he is not a believer. I mean, he wasn't, I guess, at the time. And he actually, he can still carry that something's very common in Kansas. He fully believed there was definitely somebody in that house. And he didn't know why, but he's like, there has to be someone in this house, because there's no way this picture flew across the room. So he went and he started, looking around the house. He put my grandma on the front porch, and he started going room to room to room to room. And he had his concealed carry weapon, and he was going through the house, went down the basement. He went everywhere, which this is a single house with just a basement, and we just use the basement for storage. At one point in time, there was a washer and dryer down there, but Grandma can't get down the stairs, so we moved it upstairs. But yes, my brother called me, and he was speechless. He was everything. He was everything. Everything that he ever believed in was just in question, and he thought he was crazy. So anyway, I just want to let you know that I really do truly believe my grandma is very truthful. She's the most honest person, honestly, that I've ever really known. She'll tell you the way it is. Anyway, I really haven't told anyone that, and it's just actually kind of giving me the goosebumps even talking about it. It's just, I choose not to go to my grandma's house at night if I can help it. We got her a life alert button just for that very reason, because honestly, I'm very hesitant sometimes going into her house, because I don't know if whatever is occurring is alive or dead. And not everything in the house is nice. It's just impossible that is the case. Anyway, thanks. And if you can use this, great. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sam. Ooh, that's kind of creepy. Your poor grandmother. She was probably excited, assuming that this strange fedora-donned man was her long-lost husband. Imagine the disappointment and, more relevantly, the fear that likely hit her when she heard the mystery man utter the word, "No." My blood ran cold for her.
Forward quickly, because
Well, welcome back to the program, squad. It's a real joy to have you with us here tonight. And you've picked a great night to join in, because I have all sorts of creepy stories to share here in the extended portion of the program. And to get us back on track, we've ventured to Big Sky Country. Joe from Montana, welcome to the show.
This is Joe from Montana again. I'm calling in to tell you about my Bigfoot story that I had. It was about 5 years ago, and I was dating a girl from Idaho. So we were down in Fort Hall visiting her dad. It was probably late June, early July, and decided to go see her grandpa that lives down there, and he got an apple tree outside of his house. And so I went out one day, just the car, and I had a weird feeling like I was being watched, and I didn't think anything of it. And then the next day, we were back down there, and I was talking to her grandpa, and he was saying he was hearing some weird noises and stuff, and I didn't think of anything of it, just kind of weird. So I went back out to the car to get something, and I wound up, something made me go to the apple tree, and I found this weird, thick, dark hair hanging on some branches. And then I realized that there was a big footprint in the soft dirt, and that kind of got me weirded out. But then me and a couple of her nephews the next day were out shooting magpies. They're the ones that get in and ruin his crops in his garden, so he gave us all permission. So we were standing outside, and in the back of his house is this huge field, and there's a random patch of trees in that field. And I was standing there, and I heard this weird, I don't know how to call it, it's like a weird howl. It wasn't a cow. It wasn't any sort of animal that I know. I used to grow up on the res, so I grew up with cows, horses, and all that stuff around. So it wasn't any of them, and I just couldn't put my finger. And I went in and I told her grandpa about it. And he's like, oh, yeah, I hear that all the time. So I just kind of ignore it. So that's probably the closest I came with Bigfoot. Just wanted to let you hear my story. But yeah, just keep it spooky. Bye.
Thanks, Joe. You know, I read somewhere that, on average, Montana has 51 reported Bigfoot sightings per year, which means residents have a 1 in 20,000 chance of spotting the creature. You know, honestly, when it comes to Bigfoot, those are some pretty good odds. Now, like most places, Montana has a Bigfoot celebration. Although, per usual, Montana does theirs just a little bit differently. A tradition since 1990, the annual Bigfoot hunt in Elliston is a giant game of, if not drunken, then definitely buzzed, nighttime hide-and-seek. Before the hunt begins, Bigfoot, a volunteer in a Bigfoot costume, hides himself somewhere among the brush on a 10-acre plot of land, owned by the original owners of Elliston's Law Dog Saloon. Revelers begin to trickle in by midday, eager to beat the 6 p.m. registration deadline. When night finally falls and the full moon rises, the hunt begins. In addition to Bigfoot, whose capture will earn the $150 grand prize, Law Dogs also hides 2 human-sized beer bottles, each worth an embroidered coat, and scores of balloons containing a total of over $250 in donated prizes. Now, we couldn't find any info on if this tradition is still going strong, so if you're hip, let us know. But it sounds like a great time to me, and oddly enough, I think I'd want to be the Sasquatch hiding rather than the hunters hunting. I don't know, I just like a good challenge. But if you have any photos or videos, send them our way, Joe. And speaking of Bigfoot footprints, I really want to add to my Bigfoot footprint cast collection. So if you have a hookup to any authentic casts, copies are okay. Hit me up. I'm suddenly in the market. And thanks again, Joe, for sharing that phone call. Now, folks, next up we visit with Murphy in the bluegrass state of Kentucky.
Hey, Derek. It's Murphy from Kentucky again. It was the year 2000. I was 12 years old. I don't know what time of year it was. I just know it was 2000 because we only lived in that house for that year. I was stressed out. I don't know how late it was, but it was dark outside. And I was stressed out. Mom and Dad had been fighting. My brother had moved out a while ago. Like, it was just rough around home. And I remember I walked into my room and I closed my door and I didn't turn on my light or anything. And I just kind of plopped on my bed. And I just sat there staring at my blank TV screen in the dark. And this thing comes flying in my window. And my window's closed. So it just passed right through it like it was nothing. It was this incredibly bright sphere. The thing itself, I'd say, was probably about the size of a golf ball. But it lit up my room like beyond daylight. And it shot in. And I don't want to call it an orb because it didn't behave like any that I've seen. And it didn't behave like a UFO. It seemed to feel the effects of inertia, like how UFOs make 90-degree angle turns, and there's no issue. This thing, it came in my window and it was flying, and it seemed like it meant to stop right in front of my face, but it kind of just kept going as it slowed down as much as it could, about another 1.5 feet, and then it kind of snapped back too in front of me. And then it just kind of hovered there. Not still, but just kind of hovering. And it was the brightest thing I've ever seen. But I could look directly at it, and my eyes did not hurt. It wasn't like looking at the sun or extremely bright headlights. Like, I never felt my pupils adjust or dilate rapidly. It was so weird. But it shot in. It hovered in front of me for, I don't know, maybe 10 seconds. And then it just shot right back out my window. And I got up and I went to my parents' room and I was like, hey, y'all aren't going to believe this. But long story short, I grew up, my parents are religious fanatics. I actually grew up in a cult. So the satanic panic, my family's experience with that was on the extreme side. So they believed 100% that I'd seen what I'd seen, but chalked it up to a whole lot of other stuff. Read way deeper into it, but I don't know, it just blew my mind. I've always been a believer and I always wanted to see something incredible, and that was the first time I'd seen something I absolutely could not explain. And I don't remember being scared or anything. I just remember looking at it thinking, is this really happening? But I don't know, it was wild. But most other orbs stories I hear, I just referred to it as an orb, involve larger, brighter objects off in the distance, slowly getting brighter and dimmer, moving slowly. This was not like that at all. This was extremely bright. It was very tiny, and it moved very fast. Honestly, it looked like Tinkerbell from Hook. The way it moved, that's the best I can compare it to. And I hate that that's it. But yeah, that was my first time seeing something like that, and I just remember thinking, oh my God, is this really happening? But love the show, and congrats on the wedding. I don't think I said that last time, but thanks.
Thank you, Murphy. Now, I chose to share this one tonight because of a call I aired on last week's episode. Bella's Ball of Light call out of Massachusetts. She explained that she saw a ball of glowing light inside a screened-in area at a restaurant she worked at. And for some reason, I sort of fixated on the idea that something like that couldn't pass through the screen without damaging it, assuming the orb to be ball lightning and not some sort of intelligently controlled craft. And again, I shared this one because the ball of light Murphy witnessed seemed to float right through a pane of glass. Glass, a window screen. They're both solid objects that one of these lights passed right through. Now, per usual, this little realization gives us zero answers, but it does open up a world of questions. So thank you again, Murphy, for inspiring us. And thanks for the congrats. Sarah and I just celebrated our 5th year anniversary just a couple of months ago. Now, next up is one of those guardian angel stories that we hear about from time to time. These types of calls are always wild. Well, Rohan from South Carolina, welcome to the show.
Hey, this is Rohan. So I'm from North Carolina, and my life has basically been surrounded by paranormal activity, but all of this in a good manner. It's kind of like if I have a guardian angel or spirit continuously watching over me. Well, anyways, one of my most vivid memories occurred to me 2 years ago at the night of my sister's prom. It was May of 2018, and to give a little bit of background, my sister had requested after her prom ended and she hung out with her friends that I would pick her up, and around 12 a.m. I left to pick her up. While I was away, one of the tables in my room, a table basically made entirely out of glass that has 3 shelves, the topmost shelf exploded, loud enough that both my parents were awake from the explosion. The way my parents explained it is as if somebody threw a grenade under the table, and the pieces of the glass ended up like all over the place. Like some were on my bed 4 feet away, some were in the closet, which was 20 feet away. And my background, like I'm studying mechanical engineering, so I really tried to come up with an explanation for the forces that acted on the table, but all the forces were upward forces to cause the table to explode, and the weight of everything on the table should have pushed it downwards. So it couldn't have been explained rationally. And the funny thing is that if I was in my bed, I probably would have been hurt or injured or something like that. But that's not where the story ends. So also in some spiritualities, such as Reiki or like spiritual healing, such as Reiki, graphene crystals are known to attract bad energies. And once they do attract them, they tend to break or basically in my case explode. So in all honesty, I was expecting something big to happen within the week or so. And it happened on Thursday night of the following week. I was driving back from Target late at night and had my windows down, listening to music and all that stuff. And the light was green. So I started accelerating, but I didn't notice there was an oncoming car coming towards me. And he basically ran the red light going at 60 miles per hour and noticed my car at the very last second, so he slammed his brakes. He basically missed my car by 2 feet, but if it collided with my car, he would have, again, pretty much injured me or hurt me in a really bad way because my windows were down, and he would have hit my driver's side door. So essentially, call it whatever you want to call it, but I felt like at that time these energies or the table exploding basically saved my life. And essentially that's my experience. I hope you can use it, and I really enjoy your show. Thank you.
thank you, Rohan. Now, I can't speak for the rest of the experience, but I do know that most of those glass shelves are made of safety glass, which is designed to shatter when broken, so that large shards of glass can't stab, slice, or cut you if it breaks. And I also know that quick changes in temperature and humidity can cause safety glass to shatter. Just put a cold Pyrex dish in a hot oven. You'll see what I mean. But what caused it to break in the first place is a good question that I have no answer for. And all that said, it certainly seems like something interfered with Rohan's timeline. Or at the very least, gave it a little nudge. Whatever it was, we thank you again, Rohan, for calling in. Alright folks, this is tonight's final entry, and it comes to us from the state of Oklahoma. Chris, welcome to the program.
Hi, Derek, love the show. This is Chris from Oklahoma, and this happened to me and my ex-husband in the early 90s. He got promoted, got a new store. We moved to a small town in Oklahoma, which came with a new house. And the house was older house, but, it never bothered me or anything like that. And everything was fine at first, but then when we would come home, it was just an uneasy feeling. It was a gradual thing. The pictures of me, whether they were on the walls or on the TV, were always facing down. Any picture with me in it, I would come home and it'd be on the floor facing down. At first I thought it was just me being paranoid or, settling, walking across the floor and stuff and make them fall off or what have you. Well, then it was almost every day I would put them up, and then I tried to rearrange them, and I just could not keep photos of me on the wall or on the TV. And there's been so many times that I would be sleeping on the couch, facing the back of the couch, but just knowing somebody was behind me, but I was too scared to tell. There was also an incident when came home, and in the kitchen, there's no big lighting that goes into that kitchen. There's one little window, and that kitchen was so bright. And I went in there, which I never do because it gave me huge anxiety just to walk into that kitchen. And I walked in and I seen this round, floaty ball, like probably a little bit smaller than a basketball or a volleyball. And it went around this bar in this like a breakfast nook, and it went around the bar, and I went around and then it just disappeared. And oh God, I ran so fast. There was also times when I'd be on the phone with my mom and, be telling a story, and it would be like in a really horrible voice, like, isn't that a funny story? And I can't even do it. And my mom's like, Ty, is somebody on your phone? And I'm like, no, absolutely not. There is only one phone and I'm on it. And so I kind of freaked out about that. That happened twice. And the second time it happened, my mom just, she's like, mm-mm. And then one of the things happened was my ex-husband and I were watching TV, and you can see into this extra room because the way the windows were facing, it was like made an L shape. So you can see directly into this other room from the living room. And we're sitting there watching TV, and I seen a silhouette of somebody, just like float sideways. And me and my ex-husband looked at each other and was like, did you just see that? And he goes, yeah. And I was like, told my brother-in-law, I said, somebody's down in your room. We go down there. There's absolutely nobody down there. And the way that the silhouette moved, it would have moved into a wall. There was like nothing there. So I can't figure out how that would have moved or where it would have gone. But just a lot of things happened. We finally moved after 3 months of living there, and we could not breathe when we went in there. Like, absolutely could not breathe. Like, our breath was being taken out. So we left beds, furniture, everything. We're like, this just has to stay because I'm not going to go and move that. I can't. It's a very scary place to stay. My brother-in-law actually found out later that when he was talking to some people at a gas station and said that we were new in town, and they were like, oh, where are you, from? And he told them, and he's like, oh, he came back and told us that an old lady died there. I have no idea who she was, what the circumstances was, or anything. That just really gave me chills because for some reason, and it became a joke that she hated me, and I really felt that hatred that she hated me. It was just if anything bad happened, it was like, that was the joke. It was her that did it and what have you. But anyway, I don't know. Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you, Chris. Could you imagine every picture of yourself in the house mysteriously face down, shade thrown by an unseen hand? And talk about taking it personally. I don't know how else you could take it. And this reminds me of another call from last week, a call that many of you seem to be affected by. Scott's story about a possessed doll that lived in the upstairs apartment that was so infatuated with him that she made efforts for him to join her in death. And to add all the other experiences Chris mentioned, it's certainly scary stuff. And we thank you again, Chris, for taking the time to share it here with us. All right, now time for the second half of this double feature. Season 17, Episode 19. Again, already in progress. So visit patreon.com and search for Monsters Among Us Podcast, because it's in the beyond that we get to explore all those entries, plus calls like Eric's out of the state of Virginia.
Hey Derek, my name is Eric and I'm calling from Virginia. I enjoy the stories of the paranormal, but admittedly it's more for the entertainment value than the belief in these type of things. It's not to say I'm a non-believer, but definitely what you would call pragmatic about these things. I think that's why I really enjoy your show, because you approach the stories with a skeptical viewpoint, much like I do. That said, I do have 2 stories to share, and I'm not going to declare them 100% paranormal, but I personally have never been able to explain them. The first one occurred in the summer of 1987 when I was 11 years old. My parents and my older sisters had gone out for the night. My parents left me some money to order a pizza. They rented a movie for me, Crocodile Dundee, as a matter of fact. Since I was going to be home alone, I wouldn't be bored at least. As I sat and watched the movie, ate my pizza, drank my soda, everything was good, all was well, but out of nowhere, the video cassette box that sat flat on the shelf above the TV suddenly slid itself off the shelf and onto the floor. After the initial shock of seeing something fly off the shelf, 11-year-old me put on my detective hat and set about trying to figure out what happened. Now, I should tell you that the TV and the VCR were in an entertainment center. If you remember the 1980s, you probably remember the type. Big, heavy, solid oak, indestructible. As a matter of fact, it's still in my parents' basement to this day. It was very sturdy, didn't wobble or shake or anything. Also, the room where it was in the basement of a split foyer house. The floor was a thin layer of carpet, a thin layer of padding, and concrete. So again, vibrations weren't going to be very likely. It was up against a wall, but it wasn't actually touching the wall. The stairs leading down to the basement were on the other side of the wall, and if something had hit the wall hard enough to make the oak cabinet shake, I certainly would have heard it, but I didn't hear anything. Also, if you remember the 80s, you probably remember those video store rental cases, the big hard plastic ones that had like an inch of foam lining 3 sides that you slid the video cassette in. That's what this case looked like that fell onto the floor. So we had a big, sturdy 1980s video rental box sitting flat on a big, sturdy 1980s entertainment center on top of a cement floor. It would basically take a nuclear blast to cause that thing to fly off the shelf. Now, I suppose it could have been a mouse or something like that, as we did occasionally get a mouse in the basement, but that always happened in the winter, and again, this was the summer, so it isn't likely. And again, after searching through there, I never saw any sign of anything moving. Nothing ran away. I think I would have seen it. It wasn't dark. The lights were on. I didn't see anything run away. It would have been tough to not see that. So that's the first thing that happened to me. Again, I don't honestly think it was paranormal, but I've never been able to come up with anything to explain what would cause that video cassette box to fly off the shelf like that. The second story actually happened in the same house. It actually happened just last year, though. My father was in hospice care. He passed away last August. So my older sister, she's a hospice nurse, and she had done a good job of explaining the process to the family. One of the things she said was it's very common for a person who's close to death to start seeing people from their life who have already passed away. She said it really doesn't matter if it's actually happening because it's real to the person experiencing it and it gives them comfort, so just let them have the moment. So my sister, my mom, and I were all there for him, and we kind of rotated the duty of sitting up with him at night. So one morning, a couple days before he passed, it was after my sister's night to stay up with him, I came to the house, and she had told me that my dad told her that her daughter, my niece, his granddaughter, had come to him the night before. My niece had passed away 2 years earlier after a long illness. My sister indicated this meant his time was probably getting close, and it certainly looked that way because that day his condition really, really deteriorated quickly to the point where he couldn't even speak, could barely lift his head. So that night, it was my turn to sit up with him that following night, and he was in his hospice bed with his cat who never left his side. She was sitting with him. I was on the couch next to the bed, and my parents' other cat was sitting with me. I wasn't sleeping. I was just kind of up, looking at my phone, and I heard my dad make a noise. It was the first noise he had made in hours. So I looked up, and I see him, not really sitting up, but looking up. His arms were outstretched, and he was looking across the room. So the cat that was in his bed and the cat that was next to me were also looking at the exact same spot that he was. And their gaze both followed whatever they were looking at all the way to my dad. And the cat that was sitting on his bed next to him actually got up and moved just before my father wrapped his outstretched arms around his chest as if he were hugging someone. So he stayed that way for a few minutes, and I could hear him mumbling and whispering. I couldn't make out what he was saying, and eventually he fell asleep and the cat returned to his side. So unfortunately, his condition worsened the following day. He was never really able to communicate again, so I couldn't confirm it was my niece that he had seen, though I suspect that it was. And he passed away 2 days after this happened. Again, I was told to expect him to act like he was seeing people, but the reaction of the two cats in the room was certainly not expected. So anyway, those are my stories. Hope you like them, and thanks for all you do.
Thank you, Eric. Well, there's certainly no harm in being skeptical. There are a lot of hoaxsters and tricksters out there, so there's nothing wrong with using the powers of deduction to wade through all the BS. So welcome to the club. And I agree with you. It's one thing for the dying to see things that others cannot. That's almost to be expected at this point. But when their pets see that thing as well, that adds an entirely new wrinkle. So thank you again, Eric, for calling in. We're sorry to hear about your loss.
5 and Highway 138. From the high desert. Don't forget to join me every weekend starting at 7 a.m.
You name it, if it's happening in our culture, about it, and I'm going to tell.
Welcome back, Monster Squad. It's a real pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Now, as mentioned a bit ago, I have a black-eyed kid call coming up that'll certainly leave you asking a few questions. But first, I have a whole slew of stories to share with you, beginning with Robin's entry out of the Lone Star State of Texas.
Yes, Derek, this is Robin from Texas. I wanted to share a couple of stories that have kind of intertwined a little bit. It all basically began in the early 90s, maybe 1989, when I was looking out the window I had a glassed-in dining room on the second floor of my house, and I was looking out. It was July, about 7 o'clock in the evening, and I looked up, and there was one barbell-shaped craft. So what I'm saying is that it had a globe that was lit up, connected by a cylinder with the exact same size globe on the end that was darkened out. by the time I realized what was happening, there was a second one that just kind of appeared. And these were fairly large. I started screaming for my husband, but he didn't hear me. And then they disappeared. So I never had actually thought about UFOs. I didn't even think they were real. After that, my life changed. I started seeing a lot of things and having bizarre experiences. I had a lot. Fast forward to right about 7 years ago, 2018, 6 or 7 years ago, I was teaching an art class at my school. After school, it was a kind of an additional program they let me teach to make extra money. I was teaching this class, and I had a couple of students, sisters, whose parents were late, and it was about, the class ended at 5. It was about 5:30 in February. So in Texas, it was dimly lit, but it was still pretty bright. I mean, the sun was low on the horizon. I walked the two girls. One was in second grade and one was in fifth grade. These were great kids, real sweet, well-respected in the school. I walked out in the parking lot, and we were standing there waiting for their mom. And at this time, there was my car, I think the principal's car, and the cleaning crew, and that was it. And there wasn't anybody else in the school. And we were facing the parking lot, and to the left of us, which would have been the east, was the playground. And it was right there, that butts up to the parking lot. And we start hearing children playing, laughter, like elementary school, like young kids, not middle school, but young kids playing, laughing, having a great time. And I look at these kids and I'm like, do you hear that? And they're like, yes. And we start to walk closer, and as we get closer, it gets louder and louder and louder. And we can't believe what we're hearing. We see nothing. There was nothing on the playground. By this time, we're standing to the edge of the playground, too scared to walk onto the playground, but the sound is in our face. Kids playing, laughing, obviously having a great time, but there's nothing there. And we just can't figure out what's going on. And then the second grader says to me, do you hear that siren? And I said, yeah. But to me, it didn't sound like a siren as much as it sounded like something else. But it did kind of sound like a siren. So then the kid's tone changed to like a real sinister fear. They're screaming, and you could tell they're screaming and running from something, and it was really disturbing. It was terrifying because obviously something was scaring them. And then the sound just kind of faded away and stopped, and we were left standing there not knowing what to think. I was kind of horrified because I'm in charge of these kids, and here we have experienced this really bizarre thing, and I felt responsible, but I didn't know what to do about it. So we just waited till their mom came, and then I tried to talk to her about it, and she dismissed it. So that happened, and about a week later, something else happened. I was driving and cutting through a parking lot. I lived in a small town at the time, behind this grocery store, and there were some office buildings, a dentist and a doctor's office back there. And I usually cut through to get to the service road. So I was driving, and this was probably about 11 in the morning. I had been to the grocery store. I was driving, cutting through. All of a sudden, this woman, in I think she had red pants and a black shirt, short black hair. She comes running out of the building between the cars with her cell phone up to her ear and her other arm gesturing wildly and yelling in the phone. But she cuts right in front of me, and I have to slam on the brakes. She doesn't see me, and she just keeps going. She doesn't get to her car or anything. She just keeps going to the other side of the parking lot. And I didn't really think anything about it, except that I almost hit her. And then about 2 days later, I had gone to the grocery store again, and this time it's about maybe 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's pretty bright daylight, summertime. And the same woman comes out of the building in the same clothes with the phone up to her ear, gesturing, yelling in the phone, cuts right in front of me. I have to slam on the brakes. The same thing happens. And she walks over to the side, and I couldn't believe it. It was like I was in some kind of a bizarre loop. I don't know if any of your listeners can explain what has happened to me with the playground or the woman coming out doing the exact same thing. But all this happened within 2 weeks or a week and a half of each other. And since that first sighting of the UFO in the 80s, I've had a lot of really crazy things happen. But anyway, that's my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Well, folks, what do you think? Are all these related? The barbell-shaped UFO, the sounds of disembodied children playing, and the strange woman that darted out in front of Robin's vehicle, not once, but twice. Is there a connection here? If there is, I'm not sure what it would be, but perhaps you have some answers, dear listener. If so, give us a call at 888-608-NIGHT, or send me an email at monstersamonguspodcast@gmail.com, and we'll get to the bottom of Robin's little mystery. But until then, thank you again, Robin, for taking the time to share your entry.
So don't miss morning at 9:30 right here on AM.
Right for a while, but the minute I gave up and over the hill to that Sunset Boulevard.
Now I have several calls remaining, but only one pertaining to the ghostly realm. Please welcome Daryl from Virginia to the program.
Hey, Derek. This is Daryl from Central Virginia. I drive every day for a living. I mean, I drive 2.5, 3 hours one way every day and then go back the same way. I deliver medical oxygen from the Central Virginia down to the coast of Virginia and sometimes up to north of Virginia near D.C. So I listen to your podcast and I love it, and I'm so glad you're back. I was living in the city of Richmond for the last decade and have since moved back out to the country. When I was there, my wife had, before I knew her, purchased a Civil War era home in the downtown area of Richmond, and it was an old antique home, and she had an English basement, which was like the living room or TV room. And she was a very, very light sleeper. Most of the time I slept in the living room where the TV was so I wouldn't disturb her. But this happened to me twice. My daughter was living with us at the time, and you could hear the front door open. Well, you could always hear when the door opened and people walk across the floor because you could hear it right above your head. This happened to me twice where I heard the door open, and I'm yelling up to her, "Hey, honey, I'm glad you're home." And no answer. And I hear her walk across the ceiling, or the first floor, ceiling from me downstairs, and then go upstairs to her little room upstairs. Well, I come up and don't see anything. I yell up to her room. The room is dark, and she's not there. And that happened to me twice, where I heard the door open and shut, because she didn't have a keyed lock. She had a deadbolt, so you could hear the clicking, and then the door open, and then a deadbolt replaced, and it's like I said, it's an antique home. And now I thought that was just really crazy. And then the other thing that creeped me out one time was, because I slept on a sofa downstairs, I heard a menacing growl, like a large cat or large animal growl coming from upstairs. And I must have been the only one to hear it because we had a dog, and the dog was just laying peacefully next to me. So anyway, those are the quick ones. I hope you can use them. Love your podcast. I do appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl. A menacing growl. No, thank you. Especially not in the house. Something about that detail stuck with me, and not in a good way. But that said, I do think it would be a lot of fun to own a Civil War era house. Upkeep and repairs are probably a nightmare, but the ghost stories are likely top-notch. At least they were for Daryl. And we can't thank him enough for calling them in. Now, folks, this next entry sounds like it was literally pulled from my childhood nightmares. Justin, from the Empire State. Let's hear your tale.
Hey, Derek. This is Justin from Buffalo, New York. This story actually takes place back in 2010 or 11, because my daughter was about 6 or 7 at the time. At the time, I was living in a smaller town, renting an apartment with my brother, and my daughter would be over fairly often, like every other weekend. So I was noticing during at this time, well, actually, my daughter would express to me right around when she was turning about 6 that she was like terrified to sleep, but only once in a while, because she would have like these dreams of being taken somewhere and she'd have to babysit. And of course, this made me laugh because I was like, well, that doesn't sound too terrible. And then like months went by and she told me, no, it only happens around the first of the month, and I would get taken by these really tall people, and they'll take me to this little room inside Papa's house, and I have to watch their kids. Papa is my dad, and he lived about 5 miles away from us. We used to go over there often, and she would say that they would take her to his house up in like this room, and a cave would come out of the wall, and she would have to watch these little baby people. And then later on, she was telling me the people are really, really tall. They have really, really bright blue eyes, and they carry a wand. And I was like, okay, this sounds very childlike, you know, like a child's imagination. Well, after a while, and during this whole time, my brother and I are gaining a huge obsession with extraterrestrials. And this came to light, and I mentioned it to my brother after she mentioned it, you know, several times over. And he ended up looking it up. And, like, weirdly, he found this on the internet, the tall whites extraterrestrial race. What they'll do is, and there was like several testimonials about this back then. Now I try to look this up and I can't find it anywhere on the internet. I have no idea why all this would be gone. Well, I could take a couple guesses why it would be gone, but so what a lot of people were claiming back then was that these tall white alien beings will abduct children, mostly females, between the ages of 5 to 10 to watch their young. And the basic premises was like that they respect our children, but they're very indifferent to human beings in general. They respect us as beings, but they'll kill us without even thinking about it. They kind of see us like how like we probably view insects. You know, I guess the wand that they have is like a type of scepter that if it just touches you, it'll kill you. But they're not at all violent, especially towards children. But towards people, like adults, if they feel at all threatened, they'll kill you almost immediately. I found that extraordinarily informational at the time. And then there was actually one little kid that drew this being, and I showed it to my daughter, and she was like, yes, that's it. Except his eyes are bigger, and they're real blue, and they're really, really white and blonde and really tall. Now, this is a 6-year-old, so, you know, a 6-foot tall guy is probably pretty tall, but she said really, really tall. And I had some tall members of my family, and so does her mother, so like she was definitely exposed to taller people. So when she says really tall, it's probably somewhere in like 7 to 10 feet tall. I don't know how tall the tall white beings are. And then one day when she was about 8 or 9 years old, they're just gone, and she never had that dream ever again. But it was like haunting her for a couple years. She would be literally visibly afraid to go to bed around the 1st to 3rd or 4th of the month, like every month. Yeah, it was just really crazy. I don't know if any of her listener has ever, you know, had children expressing something similar to that or what, but I just find it really compelling that, like, this day and age, with all the information coming out and all the channelers and all the abductees, that I can't find anything on the internet regarding children and dreaming and the tall whites, when I know for a fact that I actually looked at this back in 2010 or 11. Yeah, it's just really strange. Anyway, Derek, I love the podcast. Thank you for hearing me out here. Bye.
Thank you, Justin. You know, there's a lot to unpack here as well. But I think the biggest part we should address is the idea that some young girls are being abducted on the first of the month to care for or quote-unquote babysit for a strange species of alien. The tall whites, as Justin described them. Well, let me tell you, I've been interested in and researching this subject for many, many years, and that is a new one on me. Now, I asked Delaney to do some research in hopes that she could uncover the webpage or pages that Justin was referring to. But even using the Wayback Machine, there didn't seem to be anything out there. But what this story does remind me of, though, are reports I've read from abductees claiming that they were shown alien-human hybrid infants while aboard a ship during one of their abduction episodes. Now, according to Delaney, this phenomena has a name. They call it child presentation, and it's just as creepy as it sounds. Abductees of all ages, even small children and genders, sometimes report being subjected to a child presentation. As its name implies, the child presentation involves the abductee being shown a child. Often the children appear to be neither human nor the same species as the abductors. Instead, the child will almost always share characteristics of both species. Now, these children are labeled by experiencers as hybrids between humans and their abductors, usually gray aliens. It's been speculated that these children are products of the reproductive procedures performed during the medical phase of the abduction. Now, these hybrid children are sometimes described as being kept in nurseries. There are typically 10 to 50 hybrids present, but some abductees have reported greater numbers, and some alleged abductees have even reported incubatoria, where the walls are lined with fluid-filled containers where developing hybrid fetuses are kept. So that's all sort of close to what your daughter described there, Justin. And I'm sorry we couldn't pinpoint it exactly, but I'll be sure to keep my ears open, and I'll be sure to let you know if I hear anything. Thank you again for taking the time to call in. And that, folks, leads us to tonight's final entry. And I do mean it this time. Join me in welcoming Becky from Oklahoma to the program.
Hi, Derek. This is Becky calling from Oklahoma. And I've been a Patreon since the pandemic, and you guys got me through. I mean, we love Monsters Among Us, but I've never called in before. So I had a weird thing happen several years ago, and I'm surprised because I just realized it was a thing. I mean, like, I've thought about it throughout the years, but I just thought, wait a minute, what am I thinking about? This is a thing. This is a weird thing. So here's what happened. So, like, I've always wondered how people can see really, really weird things and have these incredibly disturbing things and awestruck kinds of things happen to them, but then they just forget about it, or they go back to sleep, or they don't tell anybody. And I'm like, how is that even possible? But I'm here to tell you it's possible, because I can't believe that I didn't really think that this was a thing until I started thinking about it. And I never told anybody about it, which is weird. But anyway, so here's the thing. My friend and I, she was a neighbor across the street. We had a commitment with each other that we woke up every morning at 5 and we ran a 5K at this trail close by our house. This was like midsummer, so probably in July, or it was hot. And summers in Oklahoma are really, really hot. So we would run this 5K trail either before the sun came up or after the sun went down, because it was just so hot. We didn't enjoy running in the really, really hot heat. So one morning we'd finished our run, and this was in the morning, a little before 6. It was still dark. We were driving home. I turned onto our street, and I saw this kid, probably, 10 years old, riding his bike toward us, but not purposefully trying to approach us, but just going in our direction, the direction that we were getting ready to turn. He was coming from the other direction. And he and the bike were just kind of swaying from side to side, back and forth, just kind of all over the street, like he didn't even notice us. And I wish I could accurately describe his appearance. It was so weird. He was wearing jeans and sort of a raggedy shirt, I guess. And my first thought when I saw him down the street as I turned was, why was this kid up this early and riding his bike so recklessly in the street? I mean, it was dark. And this was when he was a ways away. And so as I turned, and I wasn't talking to my friend, I didn't say, hey, you know, why is this kid in the street? Or I didn't do anything. As far as I know, she wasn't even paying attention because we never talked about it. And I never asked her about it, which is so odd to me. As I got closer, my body just froze. I was filled with such intense terror and dread. It came out of nowhere. I slowed down a bit so I wouldn't hit him. And it was then I was able to see his face coming clear out of the shadows. I was so disturbed and frightened, I felt like I shouldn't look at him directly. I was just terrified. But before I committed to that decision to not look at him, I got a glimpse of his eyes, and they were just big black holes. It looked like he had on, like, smeared black makeup. It was so, I mean, just thinking about it, creeping me out. Everything in me yelled danger. I turned my eyes back to the road, and I remembered asking, what the heck? And I don't remember my friend making a comment, almost like she didn't see him. I mean, I guess I just made, like, what the heck to myself. I never talked to her about it, and I figured maybe since I was the one driving, she wasn't paying attention to the road. I'm not sensitive, and I am as dull as a post when it comes to the paranormal. And I really hadn't thought about it for years until this week, and I'm a mom, and I'm thinking, why wasn't I worried for him? I mean, why didn't I care that this kid was slowly and haphazardly meandering the streets so early in the morning? What kind of trauma was he returning from? I mean, it just, all the normal and typical things that I would think and be concerned about just weren't there. I was just like, get me away from this kid. It didn't even occur to me that maybe he was running from something, or although he wasn't hurrying, it was weird. It was almost like he was drunk and just totally out of it. Then when I saw his face, I'm telling you, my blood just ran cold. It was so creepy. And I remember looking in the rear view mirror, you know, where did he go? Did he go to the, like, weird apartments that are kind of like alongside the trail? So I looked in the rear view mirror and he was gone. I didn't see where he went. It was jarring. And the weird thing is, I never told anyone about this. Like, I've never told my husband. So I've always wondered about that. And I just was thinking about it the other day, and I thought, I don't know why I didn't think this was weird. I mean, I did think it was weird, but I didn't think it was weird in the way that it was weird. But anyway, that's my story. I mean, it's just always kind of stuck with me. So that's it. But I just wanted to say we love the podcast. Love you guys so much. You guys have carried us through a lot of months. You've carried us through, and we appreciate it. Car rides, everything. So just keep it spooky. And if anything else happens to me, which I doubt it will because nothing ever happens to me, I'll call back. Okay. Love you guys. Bye.
Thank you, Becky. Not only for the phone call, but for the support over on Patreon. I'm glad we were there to help you through. Now, black-eyed kids, or BEKs as they're often called, are a special kind of spooky. There's so much mystery surrounding them. Nothing is for certain, and from the sounds of things, you can encounter one at pretty much any moment. At least in my opinion, those are the ingredients for a legendary entity, if we can call them that. But a BEK on a bicycle, that might be a first for me, at least from what I can remember. So I did a little digging and even thumbing through David Weatherly's book, Black-Eyed Children, that I got in a cryptic crate centuries ago. But I could not find any other reference of one of these dark-eyed demons riding a bike or using any other mode of transportation for that matter. But that's not to say that it doesn't happen. So if you have info to the contrary, please give me a call, 888-608-NIGHT, or shoot me an email at monstersamonguspodcast@gmail.com. Tell us all about it. Because until then, I'm afraid I'm at a loss for words, Becky. But I can utter the words, thank you. once again for the story and for all of the support. And that goes double for you, dear Monster Squad member. This is goodbye for now, but I will return on Tuesday with a brand new installment. Until then, thanks again for being the life force that keeps this ragtag operation afloat. Many, many thanks. And of course, do all that you can to keep you and those you love spooky. Have a good night. Monsters Among Us podcast is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Copyright Red Crow Media. Additional support is provided by Sarah Carter Hayes and Delaney Bowers. All media used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. Please follow us on social media. We have accounts at Facebook and Instagram. And you can check us out on YouTube as well. We sure could use the support there. Don't forget you can catch the show digitally every Saturday at 11 p.m. Eastern on unxnetwork.com, the Unex Digital Network. And lastly, tonight's score was provided by Iron Cthulhu, Apocalypse, Co.ag Music, and Carl Casey at White Bad Audio. If you liked what you heard this evening, please consider joining us in the beyond. Just click the Patreon tab at monstersamonguspodcast.com to learn more. Once again, thank you for tuning in and for your patience as we take a little breather. My team and I really appreciate it. Now I'll catch you back here on Thursday with a brand new episode. But until then, keep it spooky and have a good night.